Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, November the 13th, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time, and we are starting one more live stream. Let's take a look and see if any of our friends are in already or if they are about to join us. Paige, hello Luciano, how are you doing today? So good to see you here, Paige. Yes, we have our friends joining in. And while they warm up, just sharing about a type of, repetitive consultation we are having here at the firm. We have, like many couples scheduling a consultation, considering moving to Brazil because of the election results. So we usually see, like in social media about some people saying, well, if that happens, I'm going to go live elsewhere. And it looks like it's not just social media, but people actually take into consideration, election results. And we do have like repetitive consultations here at the firm. Of people considering moving to Brazil. Bill, good to see you. Bill says, "Oi, Luciano, I'm here. Good to see you here, Bill." And just sharing a little bit more about, this topic. A common question I hear, like from people considering moving to Brazil because of, political reasons is like, how is Brazil right now? And can you tell how Brazil is going to be in the future? Whether Bolsonaro is going to become president again, just like President Trump, this type of concern. And usually I try, listen, I don't try to, let's say, convince people to move to Brazil. For those of you who follow our work here at the firm, we try to be very neutral and never like to say yes, you should move to Brazil, everything is going to be perfect. Naturally Brazil, just like the United States and other countries, has many upsides and downsides as well, right? So I don't think people should move like because of a specific, election result. And just like as we know, right? Like, I see here Paige chiming in, not gonna lie, I'm in the same boat. Things are looking very scary over here. And I understand and respect your concerns, Paige. But, like there is the old saying, it's like a pendulum, right? Like it goes to one side and later on it's going to go to the other side, and then it's going to come back to this side, and so on. So that's the bottom line. And in Brazil, of course, we cannot forecast what's going to be the next election results. I can tell you, like the Lula administration is not doing great by any standards. And it's so interesting, right? Like how can Brazil emulate the U.S. so closely, right? Like we had President Trump, and then we had President Bolsonaro, pretty aligned. And then we had, President Biden in the U.S., and then we had, President Lula back to power in Brazil. Again, it looks like, a very similar type of scenario. And then now President Trump was elected, and I can tell you, like for the last Brazilian election, the Lula administration, the Lula's party, like they lost big time when it comes like to the municipal elections in Brazil. And it looks like in Brazil, it's going to be something similar. And then I remember I read a couple of days in an article at the New York Times, and they were saying that like in Europe is just the same thing, right? Like all the left-oriented parties are losing the elections, right? So things. I think it's it's more support to what I was saying. Like it works like a pendulum, right? Like it goes to one extreme and then it comes back to the other extreme. And it would be so great if we could have something in the middle, right? So nobody was going to be perfectly happy, but people would not be, despairing as much as well, right? But now, leaving the political subject aside for a second, when people ask me, listen, do you think we're going to do well in Brazil? Do you think we're going to be happy over there? And it's a really tough call to make. But what I say is like this. Listen, whenever you move to a different country, you're going to have a blast, because guess what? Like, you're going to be learning new things. Everything is going to be fresh and exciting, right? So, of course, you're going to have a blast if you move to Brazil. But now, based on my experience, right, of several decades in this cross-border business between Brazil and the United States, I can also tell you, eventually the excitement is going to wear off, okay? And then you're going to say, well, you know what? I kind of miss the United States. And that's okay. And that's okay. Because if you have the possibility of coming back to the United States, guess what? Maybe you come back to the United States for another season, and you can stay in the United States for maybe a couple of years, or 4 years, whatever timeline makes sense to you. But the really good thing is for you to have access to both countries. That's what I see, as the ideal scenario. It does not matter if it is like, a mixed couple with a Brazilian and a U.S. citizen, or if it is just like a U.S. citizen as a single person, or as a divorcee, right? It does not matter. The real beauty that I see in my work here at the firm is like when people can go and live as often and as much as they want, because then you can probably take advantage of both countries, right? Like, if you are just in the U.S., like, you kind of miss the warmth of Brazilian people, right? Like, you miss the simplicity, lots of things that we have in Brazil and people don't have in the United States, like fresh food, a healthier life for sure, better medical services, better a bunch of stuff in Brazil. But in Brazil, of course, then you're not going to have as much safety as you have in the U.S. Like in Brazil, if you are in any big city and if you try to use an iPhone on the street, there is a high risk someone is going to, catch your iPhone and run. Believe it or not, right? Like, so there are, again, like, many upsides and downsides. Same thing when you compare cities in Brazil. Like, whenever you talk about Rio de Janeiro, as you probably know, we have the so-called communities in the hills, right? Like, so we have a Favela da Rocinha in the hills and so many other communities. There is a lot of organized crime over there. Of course, most of the people there, they are just hard worker, citizens, but there is no denial. There is a very strong presence of organized crime in Rio de Janeiro. And unfortunately, because of how close the different social segments are in Rio de Janeiro, you kind of end up seeing, in our society in general, a lot of traits that are not desirable, particularly when it's related to corruption, right? I like to explain what I'm trying to say here in terms of concept. There are the so-called trabalhos fantasmas, or ghost jobs, which means it's a job created by a political member. It could be like a congressperson. They create a bunch of jobs, sometimes like 50 jobs that they're called like trust jobs. And most of those folks, maybe they are not going to be even working, right? Like, they receive a payment without working. And of course, like everybody in Brazil is pretty, quick to criticize, to say, listen, that's why Brazil, doesn't go further in terms of development. But what I see in my, personal life is that most people, the same people who are criticizing those who are taking those, fake jobs, if they are called to participate in such a scheme, guess what? I would guess, 9 people out of 10, they would participate in the scheme, right? So that's pretty visible to me, like mostly in the Rio de Janeiro society. Of course, you're also going to see that throughout the country. I'm not singling out Rio de Janeiro, but I think one thing, says all about Rio de Janeiro, right? Like out of the last 10 governors of Rio de Janeiro, I'm not sure if it was 5 or 6, went to jail for corruption. Okay, so a pretty sad trait of our society, and that's something that comes along with the package, right? So, the same thing for the United States. I mean, you have so much great things, right? Like you have a leadership in so many fronts, but at the same time, you have one of the worst food supply chains in the planet, right? Like, I mean, food in the United States is pretty bad, right? Because it comes from far away. There is a part of the food that comes from within the country, but, like the US dollar currency is so powerful that it ends up attracting actually produce from abroad. So you're going to be eating, stuff that was collected in the fields, 30, 60 days ago. And in Brazil, you usually eat, some amazing fresh food, right? So what I'm trying to say here is like, once you move to Brazil, maybe things are going to be amazing for a few years. But again, eventually the feeling is going to wear off. And if you keep this kind of open mind perspective about, enjoying the best out of the place in which you are right now, maybe that's the answer, right? Like, I mean, Brazil is not like a silver bullet. It's not going to make your life perfect for sure. It is a great choice, for a change. And again, if you can combine Brazil maybe with your, country of residency right now, some people, they also do a somewhat rotation. So, they pick Brazil, they do a combo with Portugal and the United States. Other people are getting Malta or, someplace in the Caribbean area, right? So there are so many different approaches. Matthew Davis, good to see you over here. Let's go ready for another great stream. Appreciate Matthew. Paige is chiming in. That being said, I was planning to move before all of this because I love the culture and the people. The current situation was just another reason to go. I want dual citizenship. Yes, Paige, that's a common type of feeling, particularly about the citizenship, right? Like, I mean, people don't want to have to rely on visas, on, like handouts from the government. So, yes, the citizenship is a pretty a big deal, right? Like, I mean, particularly nowadays, not just talking about the political scenarios, but listen, there is always this kind of possibility of a global war, and we never know what's going to happen if a global war occurs. So having options, right, particularly before something like this happens, it does make a lot of sense indeed, Paige. Because Paige is mentioning about the citizenship, sharing about how it works in Brazil. So in Brazil, after you've been living for 4 years as a permanent resident, you're gonna be able to apply for the Brazilian citizenship. Okay, I have some good news. I think substantially good news in terms of the language requirement. Brazil is now allowing people to prove the Portuguese language requirement, not just by taking the CELP test. The CELP test is like a really tough test that is made available once or twice a year, okay, both in Brazil and in some locations abroad. But nowadays, Brazil is accepting other type of evidence, right? Like, so we are working with a gentleman. He's originally from Mexico. He was born in Mexico. He grew up in California, and he's married to another Brazilian gentleman. And they used to live in California. They've been living in Brazil for a couple of years now, and we're gonna apply. We're going to apply for his citizenship as we speak. Like, we are organizing the paperwork, and we were discussing about the self-test, which is such a pain in the neck. And then I said, listen, how fluent are you in Portuguese, right? Like, and then I just started a conversation in Portuguese, and I was surprised, how accurate he could pick Portuguese words, right? Because he also knew Spanish, and I don't know, like, for some people, it does help with learning Portuguese, not for everyone, right? Like, for me, for instance, like, I know Portuguese, I can understand pretty much everything in Spanish, but whenever I try to speak in Spanish, like, I'm going to be probably, speaking in Portuguese, thinking that I am, speaking in Spanish, and I'm not. Right, so I just get confused. Sometimes the same thing with French. French is another Latin language. It's not as similar to Portuguese as Spanish, but also pretty similar in terms of the grammar structure. Like the sounds and so on. And I also can speak basic French. But I'm gonna mix up a lot with Portuguese and sometimes even with Spanish, right? So it's all a big mess. But going back to this gentleman, like, he can pick like the correct Portuguese word. So for him, what we're gonna do, we said, listen, you're gonna find, and they are living in Florianopolis, right? So I said, you're gonna find any type of Portuguese language program over there. You're gonna take a test, and you're gonna ask them, like, to attach your test to a kind of, like, report. Explaining, that you speak and you write and you comprehend, advanced Portuguese. And we're going to use those documents along with an affidavit from your spouse and an affidavit from us, right? Because we've been working with them like for several years now. First, we helped them buy their house in Florianopolis, so it was a real estate transaction. And then we assisted with the permanent residency for the U.S. citizen / Mexican citizen to acquire the permanent residency, right? So we know this couple for a while, and I can tell, like, he's just fine with Portuguese. So with this paperwork, we expect an approval for the citizenship, right? Now, another distinction is like for marriage-based citizenship application, you actually need a single year of permanent residency in Brazil, and if you're following the real estate route, then you're gonna need 4 years of permanent residency in Brazil. Right, so there is that. Like marriage, usually it does create like a faster track. We usually call it, like the fast track for citizenship. But I can tell you, like 4 years, particularly if you are in Brazil, enjoying different locations and finding your place in society, you're gonna see that 4 years are gonna happen in a minute. Okay, so fear not. Like 4 years is pretty reasonable, and you're gonna learn Portuguese and you're gonna get there, right? Okay, Paige. So I hope that was helpful. Paige is chiming in. No country is going to make your life perfect. Every country has its problems. Yeah, that's exactly the point, Paige. That's exactly the point. One thing we have, I think a big upside in Brazil like no wars, right? Like, I mean, Brazil, like people in Brazil are very, like, not against war. I mean, it's just not in our nature, right? Like, I mean, to fight wars abroad, even though we do have, some minor military presence in other countries like Haiti. Brazil has been, trying to assist Haiti and the United Nations with, some small, forces like from our military. But Brazil, as you probably know, it has no connection to wars. Like, it's just not part of our nature. And another thing, like, usually, there are some exceptions, but we don't have like tornadoes. We don't have, flooding. We don't have, volcanoes, right? Like, so it's also well known that Brazil in general, it's a much safer place when it comes like to nature, right? These disasters caused by nature, like Brazil is kind of, like in a very good position when it comes like to this type of rank. All right, so there you go. Let me see if we have any other participations as we speak. If you guys are enjoying the live stream, please like our live stream. The likes, they do help with our work, and they do help other people find this content. All right. So, all right, Bill is asking here, did you ride your bike today to the office? That's a great point, Bill. Yes, I mean, that's so interesting. That's one of the things I'm trying to do. Is to bike, but I do it. I don't know. Like, I mean, I get a warm, real easy, and I think if I ride my bike to the office, I'm gonna, I need to take a shower, and I don't have a shower at the office. So what I'm doing is actually trying to do it like later in the day, like to bike. For 10 minutes, like I'm trying to increase the time that I can bike. But so far it's 10 minutes. I'm doing some exams, right? Like, I mean, still trying to figure out if there is anything wrong or not with my heart. It doesn't look like something major. I'm taking like, the blood pressure. I did an echo, ECHO. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, an echo. Yesterday, I'm gonna do a stress test next week, and of course, like, I mean, I'm reducing on the Brazilian barbecue, which I am an absolute fan of Brazilian barbecue. Trying to reduce on rice. For those of you who are from the United States or other countries, like rice and beans are the staple of Brazilian meals, right? So for everyday people in Brazil, like usually you're gonna have rice and beans twice a day, right? Consistently, okay? It's not like once or twice a week. It's more like, 5 times a week for at least 2 meals. So a total of 10 meals a week, you're gonna have rice and beans, right? So I'm trying to, replace rice as much as I can with vegetables. But I do appreciate the kind of words Paige and Bill. All right, we have Roll It Out. Welcome, Roll It Out. Ulf, all right, good to see you here, Ulf. Ulf is our client, okay? If it is the same Ulf, right? I hope it is the same Ulf. Otherwise, I'm mixing up people. And Ulf could share a lot about Brazil because as far as I remember, and I hope Ulf doesn't mind me sharing that, like he was in a kind of, road trip through Fall Brazil, right, Ulf? That's not legal by any means, so I hope you don't mind me sharing. But I was excited for Ulf because, I mean, he's all over the place, especially the Northeast, which, as you guys know, that's the area I like the most in Brazil, all right? All right, so Ulf is saying, yes, it is the same Ulf. Good to see you here, Ulf. Okay. Short question, what would be the first required steps regarding tax residency if you stay longer than 140 days in Brazil? Is there anything that is enforced? Yeah, that's a tricky question, Ulf, because the way it works is like this. Like if you've been in Brazil for over 183 days, right? So the threshold is 183. I like to joke, you've been in Brazil for 183 days, no taxation. You've been in Brazil for 184, yes, taxation, right? So that's how it works. And that's within any given 12-month period of time. It's not a calendar year, right? So it doesn't have like a start or a beginning or an end. Is like on a rolling basis. Once you've been in Brazil, whether continuously or not, like, I mean, if you're outside of Brazil, of course, those days are not going to count, for the 184. But if, coming in and out in total, you exceeded the 183 days, yes, you become a tax resident. And the way this works is like from a legal perspective, right? That's what the law says. The law says 184, you are a tax resident. Now, whether you're going to file your tax return or not, that's going to be a different story, right? Then it's more a matter of your compliance to the law. What I can tell you is like some countries, for instance, the United States have treaties with Brazil, to share taxation information or information that would help both countries to know if you should be paying your taxes or not. Okay, so on the same page, like on the same direction, if you acquire residency in Brazil, like the digital nomad residency, right? The digital nomad residency does not trigger taxation by itself. Meaning that if you get the digital nomad visa / residency, you're not going to become a tax resident just because you got it. But it also doesn't shield you, right? It means like just because you have the digital nomad, it does not mean you're going to be avoiding the taxation, right? So the 184 days rule is going to trigger no matter what, right? Like I like to share, like in my consultations, I like to joke, like even if you are illegally in the country, the 184 days is going to cause you, tax resident status. Now, another day, something interesting to share, and I'm going to share, listen, I'm not giving any legal advisory in here, like it wouldn't make sense for me to be giving. But a colleague of mine who's a tax attorney in Brazil, he said, listen, for those of you who happen to be over 184 days in Brazil, I usually recommend for people to file no matter what. Even like if they don't know how much they are making or if they are not making much money, I mean, maybe they could even file as zero income because at least you kind of close the door and you have the situation like, I don't know, according to his understanding, it's better than to just ignore, right? But I would never give such advice because if I say so and if you file something with zero income, while you're having real income, then you can come back after me and say, well, you said so, right? So I never shared this type of stuff. But that was one of the things that this colleague of mine, who's a tax attorney, told someone else, right? Like to my surprise, right? Like, so you have a different strategies of, now, if you are from Europe, right? Like, I mean, if you are from Europe, remember, Brazil usually is going to give you a credit for whatever you pay in taxes in your home country when you file your taxes in Brazil. So if you're from Europe, right, like if you're paying those crazy tax brackets, chances are you're not going to need to pay anything or something very little, right? So if you're from Europe, the impression I have is that, taxation in Brazil is not a big deal at all, okay? Like, I can give an example. Like we have, of course, like clients from throughout Europe, and we do have, several clients from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, they have those crazy tax brackets, and I never saw any of our clients from the Netherlands paying anything in Brazil because, they pay 40%, they pay 50%. And whenever they come to Brazil, like the highest tax bracket is going to be 27.5. And if Brazil is giving you a credit for those 40%, 30, 50 that you paid in the Netherlands, guess what? Even if it's not like a perfect match, right? That's not what I'm saying about the credit. It's more from a high level perspective. But like even if it's not a perfect match, a perfect credit of everything that you paid, chances are you're gonna pay, like such tiny a tax amount, and particularly if you are enjoying Brazil, if you are using the country's infrastructure, I think it's not a big ask for people to pay some taxes off. And I'm not sure if you're from Europe, then maybe I would be sharing too much. But let's say if you happen to be from Europe, that's something that you could check, like how much you pay in taxes, and maybe have a consultation. Ulf is our client. Ulf can just send an email to the firm, Ulf, and I can probably get you a short courtesy consultation with this colleague of ours who's like a tax attorney. He's a former KPMG. Just like myself, I was from KPMG like in my 20s, but I was working more on the business side, and he has been in KPMG for his entire professional life, but on the taxation side. So this is the guy. Just send us an email, Ulf, and I'm going to get you a courtesy consultation with him, all right? And then you can, hear from the horse's mouth, right? You're not going to be hearing from an attorney like I do have, this kind of basic knowledge about taxation in Brazil, cross-border, but then you can have like a specializing attorney answering your questions, all right, Ulf? There you go. Okay, page M, a bit of a different direction, but if I file for bankruptcy here in the States, will it affect my ability to obtain or keep a mortgage in Brazil? So Paige, usually it's not really easy for you to secure a mortgage in Brazil. We have a client as we speak, like he's from the US. He's a retiree, and he's like in Santa Catarina. I don't think he's in Florianopolis. He's elsewhere. And he's our client, right? Like, so every now and then he sends some news about what he's doing. And he bought a plot of land, and he was trying to get a mortgage, right? Like, and he came to us and said, well, I'm trying with Bradesco. Bradesco said, I don't qualify. I said, well, you picked the worst bank to try, because Bradesco is super like traditional. Their systems, they are kind of cumbersome. I don't like Bradesco. And then I did share about 2 banks I usually share over here, in our live stream, Santander and Banco Inter, right? So Banco Inter, despite the name, it's a Brazilian bank. And I doubt, Paige, that they would kind of access your records in the United States, okay? Now, Santander, on the other side, is a bank with international presence. They are pretty much everywhere. So what I'm trying to say over here, Paige, is like maybe for Banco Inter, they are not going to even have access to this information. But Banco Santander, Bank Santander, most probably would, right? So they are going to use like information from different sources. And I would assume they are going to be able to know that you filed for bankruptcy in the U.S. All right, Paige. So, but the reality is like it's tough for foreign citizens to get a mortgage in Brazil. Usually they're going to look at 2 things. They're going to look at your status as a foreign citizen in Brazil. So if you have a permanent residency, just like in the United States, the chances of getting a mortgage are going to be higher, right? But if you're just like a digital nomad, even though you are a legal resident, you're not really, at least from an immigration perspective, you're not really here for the long run, okay? But once you become a permanent resident and you have the CPF, yes, you start to build your credit in Brazil, so you're going to have a credit score. Just like in the United States, the numbers are slightly different. In the US, it's mostly in the upper 800s, like the kind of upper limit. In Brazil, we go up to 1,000. interesting enough, like, I mean, we never had the score in the past. Like 20 years ago, there was no score. It was either, right, like black or red, right? Like black means you're good, you don't owe money to someone. Red means you owe money to someone, right? So it was really kind of, too simplistic, and it didn't take into consideration, the real history of payment. But now we have, I think it's experience from the U.S. It came to Brazil and implemented the same system from the United States, right? Like, so you see how close Brazil and the U.S. are. The credit score system we have in Brazil, it literally came from the United States, from Experian, right? And that's what we have today. So the credit score is going to be another, of course, important factor in your chances of getting a mortgage in Brazil. So we spoke about immigration, we spoke about the credit score, and the third component is going to be income, okay? Income. So if you have income in Brazil, then, and the two other things, so if you have like permanent residency in Brazil, if you have a good credit score, meaning you're paying your bills in Brazil. And the third thing, if you have income that the bank can verify, then you are good for a mortgage, right? But as you can see, not so easy, Paige. I think in Brazil, it's more difficult for someone to get a mortgage than it is in the United States. Now, if you are a foreign citizen, then it creates even more difficulty. And I do see that happening all the time. Like people just assume, all right, I'm in the country, I have a residency, I'm entitled to a mortgage, right? But the reality is different. Okay, banks are going to look at you different, and that's just a reality. All right, Paige. So I wish I would have a yes/no answer, but I gave you probably enough information for you, to consider your choices, Paige. Adabi Tony, hello Adabi Tony, good afternoon, sir, and everyone in the house. Good to see you here, Adabi. Planeta Abstracta, welcome Planeta. Do you think fast highway bullet train between Rio and São Paulo will be built in the future? Planeta, when you say in the future, right? I don't know, maybe 50 years from now, 100 years from now, I would tell you not in the near future, okay? Not in the near future. Just too many moving parts. Whenever we have, there is this kind of change, of a federal government. So priorities they change. Rio and São Paulo, they have their own agendas. All right, and there is something else to it, Planeta. I think it does make sense for a bullet train to be available between those two cities. But what I see happening is that for people who are not in a rush, they can basically just drive between those two cities, right? Like if you are a fast driver, you can make it like in 4 to 5 hours. If you are a slow driver, more like I am, you would do it in 8 hours, right? So when I drive between São Paulo and Rio, it takes me 8 hours. And I used to do that when I was younger, right? Like nowadays, I never drive between São Paulo and Rio. But when I was younger, that was my default choice, right? To drive between those two cities. And then I would, I was a bit faster back then. So it would probably take me like 6 hours to go from Rio, São Paulo, and vice versa. Now, nowadays, airfare in Brazil is pretty affordable. So, if you plan ahead of time, you can buy, like a ticket to fly from São Paulo to Rio very easily. There is a bunch of, airlines running this specific flight. And that's why, Planet, I don't think, it's not even in the government's agenda. Like every now and then you do hear about a bullet train. And then, of course, you're right that São Paulo and Rio would probably make most sense. So if we have a leadership who's concerned about developing this type of technology in the country, there would be a pretty decent candidate for the specific bullet train. But maybe just because like there are those two options that pretty much work for everyone. Like, I mean, nobody sees it as a priority, right? Another interesting take on that, Planeta, which is pretty telling, right? Like, I mean, even though Rio and São Paulo, they are close by, there is a very substantial cultural barrier between those two cities, right? Like, I mean, I don't know why. I mean, the cities, they are close by, but for instance, the difference in accent from people from São Paulo and people from Rio de Janeiro is just startling. Like, I mean, it's really heavy. I mean, to the point that even if you don't speak Portuguese, you're gonna hear, right? Better saying, you're gonna hear two very distinctive ways of communicating, right? So there is this very strong cultural barrier, and I don't know, like, I mean, it's almost like a competition in the past, and nowadays there is this thing with the accent, and like Rio has a lot of smart people, and São Paulo naturally, right, it has probably even more just because of the sheer number of inhabitants. So there is this a somewhat cultural barrier between those two cities, which maybe it does reduce a little bit, like the interchange in terms of people going back and forth. But there is still, of course, like a huge number of people going from one city to the other on a daily basis, like flights and so on. All right. Oof, glad you know. Just send the email and we get you covered. The 552, good to see you, the 552. What are your top 3 favorite places to visit in São Paulo? Yeah, so in São Paulo, right? I like the, of course, like culinary a lot. So I do have, some, favorite places to go when I'm in São Paulo. There are the churrascarias, all right? There are the churrascarias. I do go to some churrascarias that are not as famous as the ones U.S. citizens usually know, right? Like U.S. citizens, they usually are familiar with, Fogo de Chão. That's the main churrascaria, or the rodizio, right? Or the Brazilian barbecue. I go to one that is called Boi na Brasa, which would translate as a bow in the fireplace, right? Like, I mean, a rough translation. That's the one I usually go when I am in São Paulo. If I was back in my 20s or 30s, I would go to a samba place, right? Like, samba is like the main, of course, is like the most famous rhythm, like, which is particularly associated with carnival, right? Samba, right? Like the samba is a really nice, there are casas de samba. They're not nightclubs, right? Like, it's a different type of experience. It's more a place in which people are gonna play samba, and other people are gonna gather around to watch, the singers and those who are playing the instruments. So that's a very unique experience. So this would be my second one, right? And the third one, it's more like a neighborhood, right? I really like São Paulo downtown, right? Which is a kind of rough place for most visitors, because there is a lot of homelessness in this area. Like, there are sometimes, buildings that are, like they have, they are no longer in operation. So they are all, blocked for entrance. And, like, there are some things that are kind of, different in downtown area, but it does work very well for me. So if I am, for instance, like in a weekend, like usually there is a good chance they're going to have some, free events in the downtown area, like for the population in general. And again, it's a very unique experience because it's not fancy by any standards. But I like to go there because then you see like the São Paulo public in general, right? Like enjoying free music, or usually it's gonna be like a an event, like an open air type of event. There is Vale do Anhangabaú, which is a location, specific location in São Paulo downtown, is very open, and there is a lot of area. So, people can, like congregate over there. And sometimes, you have an event with, 5,000-10,000 people like watching a live show, a live music show. Pretty nice. So these would be like three choices, Planeta. Nice question. Thank you for asking. Oh, sorry, the 552, that was 552's question, actually. Don't tread on me. It has been a while, don't tread on me. Good to see you back. Luciano, oi, good to see you. You provide such a valuable service. Thank you. I appreciate your words. That's the idea, to share, like a different perspective on Brazil. But yes, I appreciate your words. Don't tread on me. Bill is asking about the speed limit between Rio and São Paulo. Yes, so the speed limit is usually, right, is going to change, and that's something that I think happens everywhere. But, like between Rio and São Paulo, of course, like we have, a highway. The main one is called the Dutra. Dutra is like the main highway between, Rio and São Paulo. And so for a very, I would say for most of it, the speed limit is going to be 120 kilometers per hour. All right, let me see if I can do a conversion real quick. Not sure if Google is going to help me. 2 miles per hour. All right. Yes, it's going to be 74.56 miles per hour. Okay, so kind of similar, right? Like, I know that at least in Texas, highways, they usually have a 70 mile per hour speed limit. So in Brazil, we would have a little bit higher speed limit of 120 kilometers per hour. Remember, right? Like in São Paulo, or actually in Brazil, we use the metric system. So measurements are not comparable to the US, right? Like, we need to do conversion. So instead of miles, we have kilometers, instead of inches and feet, we're going to have meters and centimeters, right? So, and instead of Fahrenheit, we're going to have Celsius. So a lot of conversion. But after, a little bit, you start to get used to it, and you can get a hold of those different measurements. But pretty much everything, right? Like, your weight, like we're not going to say that you have a number of pounds. You're going to say how many kilos you have. And there you go. Good question, Bill. The 552... thanks for the response. I greatly appreciate you. Welcome, the 552. Such good questions we're getting today. Paige is reminding us, don't forget to like and subscribe. Really appreciate, Paige. All right, so today we're going to finish up a little bit sooner, right? We have a closing. We have a big closing here at the firm. Is going to be starting in about, 13 minutes. But I'm going to take an additional couple of questions. Don't remember, we have a live stream on Sunday, okay? Like, I really like to meet you guys on Sundays. And I make the time to come here. And I already scheduled the live stream for Sunday. So if you don't want to... forget about, just come to our, channel, find the live stream, and you click on notify me. So whenever the live stream starts, you're going to see a message. Bill is saying, yes, 14 watching, only 9 likes. Thank you for noticing, Bill. Yes, if you are watching as you speak, just do me a favor. I understand sometimes it's tough, like if you were watching from an iPhone, right? Like I don't even know how you're going to do that. But, sometimes it's just a matter of, like lifting the YouTube screen, and then you're going to have an option to like it. it's really appreciated. It does help with our business, and it does help other people just like you guys to find this content. Many Moon Acres, look at that. Like, we have a lot of people coming back. Many Moon, good to see you. Greetings, Luciana and Galera. I noticed airline websites require CPF when booking. Is there a benefit for using CPF when foreigners are booking flights from within Brazil, or only for Brazilians? That's an interesting question. So first thing to tell you about the CPF minimum is that, every now and then we have a client here, the firm saying, well, I don't want to have my CPF anywhere. You don't dare write my CPF anywhere. I say, listen, the CPF is not like your Social Security, right? Like, we understand Social Security to U.S. citizens is super confidential, right? Like, people protect their Social Securities with their lives, and that's because of identity theft, right? But in Brazil, it doesn't work like that. Like, the CPF is actually a pretty common ID, and it's actually becoming like our number one ID, right? Because the CPF is a federal number, and therefore it's not like the Brazilian ID card that we have, which is called RG, and the RG, they are issued on a state level, meaning like, I could have the same number as someone else, I don't know, in Mato Grosso do Sul or Santa Catarina, right? Now, the CPF, like, it's a unique number created by the federal government for each applicant. So once you get your CPF, it's gonna be your unique ID, and that's why companies in general, they are gonna ask for your CPF because they wanna have a unique ID for you as a customer, okay? Now, of course, if you buy something and if they issue, let's say like an invoice based on your CPF, on your tax ID, this information is also gonna be, reported electronically, of course, to the Brazilian taxation services, right? So because of, a high level of tax fraud in Brazil, the tax authorities, they are going to bend backwards to make sure that they know what people are doing. So the CPF, it's ideal for the Brazilian government because it's both a unique identifier, and it's also a way to track what you're doing, right? Like, so another example, if you're paying for a health consultation, and your physician gets your payment, guess what? The government is going to know that he got this money. So basically, the government just needs to see, how much he got in payments from the individual CPF tax IDs, and the government is going to pretty much know how much he made in revenues in a given year, right? So that's the point, all right, minimum. Now, from a practical perspective, the CPF is a must for foreign citizens, in my opinion, because otherwise you cannot do a bunch of stuff. Like, you cannot even have a cell phone, right? Like, so if you travel to Europe, or if you travel to the United States, to many countries, like to the Caribbean area, nobody's going to ask you for a tax ID, right? Like, you just buy a SIM card and you install, replace on your phone. Nowadays, there is the eSIM, right, which is basically just a code that you're going to input into your phone, and you're going to have like an electronic SIM installed in your phone. But the point is, nobody's asking what is your tax ID, right? But in Brazil, guess what? Because of this movement, of this creative approach from the Brazilian government to track people's expenditures, you either have a CPF or you get no phone at all, right? So pretty interesting. That was such an interesting question. So there you go. That's it for today. I want to thank you for your participation, for the really interesting questions we had today. And I invite you to get back here on Sunday so we can continue this really nice conversation. And I want to wish you guys a blessed rest of your Wednesday. You take care.